Welcome to our lecture on Europe in the wider world within the context of distance learning program for IR master's degree. Today we're going to look at the European Union and its relations with the United States, which is one of its main partners. When we look at the EU-US relations, first we need to actually provide the main dynamics. One of the first things to consider is the US role in the establishment of the European Union itself after the Second World War. Here we can say that the US federal system was an inspiration to European integration and the leaders' consideration for integration. And we can also say that the US was an important actor in providing the necessary framework of stability, which is actually a more important factor in that respect. Economic and political and security stability within Europe that was necessary for the foundation and development of the EU integration process. When we look at the EU integration process itself, however, we see that one of the attempts here with the process was to match the US and Soviet superpowers, or at least to create a third power, a third force in international relations that would create a balance between the two. Therefore, we can say that the US is perceived as a key partner and the leader in the integration process and a potential rival in world politics. When we look at the EU-US relations, we need to consider this within three dimensions. First, the impact of the EU-US relations on the EU's system of international relations within the EU itself, on the EU's role in the process of international relations, and on the EU's position as a power in international relations. We will take up all these issues one by one, but let us have a look at the historical framework of the EU-US relations. First, it may be argued that interdependence forms the basis of EU-US relations. We can give several examples to that. The Marshall Plan of the 1940s and the 1950s that was provided by the United States for the reconstruction of Europe was the main basis of this interdependence. The European project was closely linked to the Western world economy during the Cold War from 1945 to 1990, and the process of globalization well into the 21st century. The impact and spread of the 2008 financial crisis presents this interdependence clearly, actually. The crisis started in the United States and then spread to several EU member states. And when we look at actually the details, we see why the two sort of influenced each other. Here you can actually check the box 17.1 on page 406 from our reference book from Christopher Hill and Michael Smith. Two things we can actually point here. Trade in goods and services is an important factor in presenting this interdependence. They are each other. The EU and the US are each other's largest trading partners. And when we look at the foreign direct investment figures, we see that by far the largest investment relationship in the global economy is the one that is between the US and the European Union. And when we look at the period from 1945 onwards, one of the things that we can say is that there has been consistent growth of economic links and continuous deepening of economic relations between the EU and US. And this was despite troubled times, such as the 1980s and different perceptions on how to approach the Soviet Union, and the 2003 Iraq intervention. We can actually amount this issue to the fact that the EU has come to be seen as an economic superpower, which was perceived as a partner of equal strength, at least in economic terms, to that of the US. And however, this raises a number of questions. Are the US and the EU effectively integrated? This is our first question. Are they global economic rivals? Given the rise in the number of disputes in trade, investments, competition, and other regulatory policies, this is questioned as well. And what are the implications of a possible rivalry, strong rivalry between the two? Is the EU able to mobilize its economic resources to achieve equal influence with the US? This is one of the debated issues. We will expand on these questions. How might this EU-US balance be affected by the rise of other major economies such as China and India? First, let us have a look at the political aspects of the European project. The development and consolidation of anti-communism in the 1950s was made possible with the integration process. What we see here actually is, as a reaction to anti-communism, the development of European socialism and Euro-communism in the 1970s and 1980s. And in the 1980s, from 1980s onwards actually, we see the spread of free market and liberal ideas in Europe at large. However, we see that there emerged new threats with the end of the Cold War from 1990 onwards. And this, of course, brings up questions on the EU-US relations as well. To what extent do the EU and US really share common values is the first question. What is possible for the European Union to develop and export? Let me repeat that. Was it possible for the EU to develop and export a different brand of democracy underpinned by economic success and by the mechanisms in the common foreign and security policy? The range of areas covered by the political initiatives in the immediate post-Cold War period raised important questions on the transatlantic coordination and its impact on internal and domestic policies. We can say that the economic and political factors are linked to the security question. Initiatives on security issues are indicators of political cooperation as well. Here we can actually give the example of Declaration on Combating Terrorism and Energy Research Cooperation Agreement. One of the things that we can derive from the EU integration process is that the EU can be analyzed as a security community, which reflects the fact that security issues have also been important for the integration process. A good consequence of this has been the Franco-German rapprochement for the prevention of armed conflict in Western Europe in this sense, and creation of economic and political conditions that would render the West strong in the conduct of the Cold War. We see that this led to the emergence of the EU as a civilian power and the US as a dominant power that embodied the hard security dimension as well. So this soft security, civilian power and hard security nexus sort of brings in an unequal relationship between the two. The US dominance extended to the economics of military production in this sense and the development of defense industries, and this has been very important in terms of technological development and advancement actually in the United States. And this brought up a basic question: how far might and should the European Union aim to duplicate, complement, or even supplement the US in European security issues and in the broader security debate within the global arena? How far was the notion of civilian power in the European project simply a reflection and rationalization of subordination and containment by the United States? Did the EU present an alternative model of security policies as well as a possible alternative economic and political model? These questions can be brought up for the differences, especially in the post-Cold War period. As the European integration process gained momentum and spread into areas of foreign policy cooperation, especially starting from 1970s to 1980s, but the main advancement in these issues have been the 1990s, there has emerged speculation about the future of the relationship on the EU-US relations. and this has brought about a political debate. Basically, this was related to the new challenges and opportunities during the Cold War, post-Cold War period. Let us keep that in mind, the differences in the US and European Union approach, and have a look at the three dimensions. First, let us concentrate on the EU relations and the EU system of international relations. One of the things, first things we can say here is that the US can enter into the system both as a contextual actor, but also as a participant. Here, of course, we need to refer to the multi-level governance literature. The EU is characterized by subnational, national and supranational policy-making competences, as we actually looked into by looking at different policy areas. And when we look at the US factor here, we see that it enters into many different levels. Various economic policy areas, such as monetary and investment policy, and different US actors, the US government and companies have been, US companies, especially those active within the European Union, have been effectively involved at different levels. The USA, with its federal structure, also presents an example of multi-level system. When we look at the IR literature, we see that it focuses on multiple actors, multiple levels of influence, political economy focusing on choices and positions of welfare and social issues, for example. When you look at the US ability to exert influence in the EU's system of international relations, we can say that the US has worked to develop special relationships with member states, especially to undermine the solidarity within the European Union. And this makes use of the intergovernmental nature of the European Union, on the other hand, especially in the area of security. And we can point out here two important narratives of possible US influence on EU's international relations. One is related to the political economy dimension. Here we can say that the EU has a set of institutions and resources to undertake collective action in a range of contexts. And we see that the EU-US relations occur via many agents at a range of levels. For example, the EU institutions, the EU Commission is effective at the World Trade Organization, but we also see that members are also influential. And usually while taking decisions on trade aspects, the members also, and the EU itself also consults different actors within the European Union. This political security domain is a second dimension that we can talk of. Here the important dimension is the EU's attempt to develop a common foreign and security policy and European security and defense policy. Here, one of the main aims of the European Union has been to attempt to fill the gaps in US policy. However, we also see that the EU has been developing this program as a means of responding to the challenges of successive US administrations, especially in the 1990s and 2000s. However, the European Union is constrained by the dominance, hegemony of the US in conflicts that lead to war or require near-war operations. Examples of this contrast include the war on terror, in this sense, and the invasion of Iraq, for example. And in these two instances, we see that the solidarity within the EU collapses, and there emerged different dilemmas and differences between members, where members are characterized as old versus new members, old versus new Europe. And also we see that there has emerged strong frictions between bigger member states, such as France and Britain, for instance. Britain was strictly and closely supporting the United States position in the case of Iraq, whereas France and Germany were against a US operation in Iraq. And of course we need to make a reference to the shared competences here. the shared competences in the area of security especially, complicates collective action. And this creates basically a capabilities expectations gap for the European Union, particularly in the foreign and security policy domain. We see that the US actually approached this from a national interest perspective. It has sort of worked in making use of these frustrations within the EU's inability to reach decisions, and thus provided certain questions on the EU's ability to share the real burden of hard security operations. And of course, the US approach made reference to strategic attempts to use European disintegration to its advantage through special relationships, especially with its long special relationship with the United Kingdom and the new members of the European Union in Eastern Europe. Divisions among the European Union members led to the Commission to explore possibilities to further integration in this sense. The attempt here has been to coordinate cooperation with the US in the areas of judicial and police services, for example. And this has been particularly important with respect to the developments on the war on terror. And the US has been actually very effectively pressurizing the EU to act together and in collaboration with the United States in this respect. The Lisbon Treaty, 2009 Lisbon Treaty, has attempted to close the capability gaps and to establish a single voice in external and internal security by establishing an EU president and a new High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. Some argue that the creation of these new positions led to ambiguity, rather than actually solving problems, on how the foreign policy agenda would be set, and of course also institutional contestation within the European Union. Actually, when we look at the relationship between the two, especially with respect to foreign policy and security area, we see that the transatlantic relationship is central to the broader process of international relations. During the 1990s, both sides tried to institutionalize the EU-US relations and to provide a framework of rules and procedures in order to overcome their differences in coordination. Some examples here are the Transatlantic Declaration of 1990, the new Transatlantic Agenda of 95, the Transatlantic Economic Partnership of 98, and the still negotiated Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the TTIP. All these attempts basically try to promote peace, stability, democracy, and development, responding to global challenges, contributing to the liberalization and expansion of world trade, and improving communication and ensuring a long-term commitment to partnership between the EU and US. And we can say that they are very broad, including also transgovernmental and non-governmental actors and institutions. Let us now concentrate on the EU-US relations and the process of international relations. When we look at the EU-US relationship in political economy, we can say that the deepening with potentially far-reaching implications has been very important for the broader process of global governance and regulation in global political economy. They can be considered as partners in competition, but there is a very high level of competition regarding policies towards developing countries and environmental management, for example, in this sense. And this, of course, brings forward questions on the EU ability to exercise its soft power and leadership in the process of international relations. Here, of course, the US prominence in proposing international solutions to the economic crisis involving IMF, including the crisis in Eurozone has been very effective and questioning the role of the European Union soft power. The other example has been the inability of the European Union to come out with a binding agreement at the UN climate change meeting in Copenhagen in December 2009, where the Kyoto Protocol was actually one of the main policies in debate. And of course, here the important factor has been the decisive intervention of the United States to persuade the emerging powers on a non-binding agreement. Another problem in the case of EU-US relations and its influence on the broader process of relations, international relations, has been the fact that EU is not seen as a real player in many areas of hard security and conflict management in this respect. Historical record presents that the European Union was unable to act collectively, especially when you look at the conflict in former Yugoslavia, for example, and the Iraqi conflict. You see that the EU has been unable to respond collectively and effectively to these problems. However, this difference between the US and the EU has created a new perception, a new culture in which the Americans fight wars and Europeans do the dishes. They work specifically on the reconstruction process and peace building. And we can say that here, despite its shortcomings, the EU is not completely ineffective, right? Well equipped to deal with, for example, post-conflict management cases, reconstruction and state building activities, such as the ones that has taken place in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Afghanistan. Of course, these two aspects, intervention through war and peace building and state building activities and reconstruction activities, has not been able to solve the problems in these countries, but they have at least stopped the armed conflicts and provided sort of a sense of dialogue between different partners there. So though limited, the European Union has also presented engagement with conflicts beyond Europe. Peacekeeping missions in Chad and Central African Republic in the African continent, for example. Mediation in the Russia-Georgia conflict in 2008, after the war, during and after the war. Normalization process between Serbia and Kosovo, especially following the independence of Kosovo in 2008. And of course, the possibility to make the nuclear deal with Iran a reality in this sense. The members' commitment to act collectively, of course, presents both advantages and limitations to the EU process. We can refer to competition between the EU members and the EU institutions here as one of the problems. Despite its complications, though, the EU embodies a normative or civilizing process in the broader world arena. And the EU disputes with the United States reflects underlying value differences. Here we can refer to varying views of members on neutrality and security, especially in policies towards the Middle East and the US missile defense system. However, we should emphasize here as one of the important factors the merits of critical dialogue that is used by the European Union, in contrast to the US focus on more coercive and aggressive measures, as in the case of Iran, for instance. And what we can say simply is that actually the EU aims to externalize, export, use of its best practices within the common market. Let's say policies on human rights and environmental policies as well. So EU is trying to extend its procedural dimension to the international system and use that as an important aspect of its influence in the international system. To what extent does the EU shape the agenda of international institutions and how does that bring it into collusion with the United States? We can say that the Commission can speak and negotiate on behalf of the European Union members in institutions of global governance such as the World Trade Organization and a number of global environmental organizations. So the EU can be effective through its institutions in these areas. In others, however, EU's representation is mixed and its voice is less unified and consistent, and this creates problems, of course. However, when we look at the EU as a whole, we can say that it can take a key role in agenda setting, in negotiation, in coalition building, and other aspects of institutional life. This basically depends on the experiences of EU member states through the process of EU integration process itself. In some cases, there are effectively free EUs for different purposes. The EU of Euroland, comprising the Eurozone member states, the EU of 28 member states agreed on certain economic and financial positions, for example, and the EU's member states as independent financial and monetary authorities with voices and votes of their own. And the free EUs has been actually one of the complications for the EU role in international relations. The EU ability to act as a soft power, economic power, is limited, as we said, due to the uncertain and patchy euro and its ability to act collectively in the security area. The EU has initiated exporting of its policies in order to benefit from its first mover advantage, and it has actually proceeded in part by trying to rival the United States, by trying to contain the United States, and by trying to create new foundations for EU-US cooperation. As a result, EU and US discourse and practices has had significant restructuring effects on the broader world arena. So actually the negotiations between the two had important reflections for the process of international relations itself. The EU aims to establish itself as an independent and influential force in the definition and development of the global governance system specifically in this respect. Let us have a look at the EU-US relations and the EU's position as a power in international relations. The evolution of EU as a power in international relations has inevitably become a point of tension with the United States. EU power, resources, and the process by which they are mobilized and deployed is conditioned by the fact that the EU is founded on states. The EU focus is largely confined to those areas that fall outside the realm of hard security and high politics, as we have emphasized already. There are different types and mixes of power, and how this enters the EU-US relations and how it affects the EU-US relations is important. Ideas about resources, capacity, capabilities, about the combination and mobilization of power, and about the management of this power at the national, international levels are the preoccupations, or have been the preoccupations, of the international relations literature. One of the main emphasis in the EU on the EU in the IR literature here has been the fact that the EU and US are two qualitatively different types of power. EU is a soft power. It is constructed around a predominantly soft notion of power, focusing and rationalizing EU's interest as a trading state. This is one of the key aspects, with key interests in economic and social realms. The aims here has been to make economic gains and to establish key welfare objectives. US power, on the other hand, has been rooted in political and military aspects, the hard power dimension. The US has resources and can address problems in a way that the Europeans cannot envisage. It has a capacity, for example, to intervene on a global scale. Intervention in conflicts in the former Yugoslavia makes these differences more apparent. The EU had to rely on the United States to inject a large number of troops and other material in the Yugoslav successor states after the conflicts were over, in this sense, in order to establish stability and start the reconstruction process. How far does this power disparity extend, and how far are its effects felt in the area of non-military power? The EU can exert a growing amount of institutional power through international regimes and organizations. This has been one of the main areas of focus for the European Union, as I said. It has been trying to establish an international system that is more based on international legal framework, international law, and international regimes. And it has been trying to sort of strengthen international organizations and institutions. The EU has not been an important security power. However, it has been a very important diplomatic actor. You can actually confirm this by looking at the cases of and the situation in the Balkans and the nuclear power deal with Iran. To what extent does the United States perceive the EU as a major power? So basically, perceptions of the others are important if you want to be defined as a global power in this respect. The US sees the European Union as a civilian and regional soft security actor with a frustrating role in the broader diplomacy of the world order, especially when looking at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We can see that the EU has been effectively part of the quartet that has been dealing with this conflict together with the US, UN, and Russia. This has produced a roadmap. However, the US interests has limited the diplomatic successes of the quartet. So one of the questions here is the inability to overcome the interests of other great powers. Do other actors perceive the European Union as a persuasive voice in international politics? Well, when we look at the European Union, actually we can say that it has a well-established role in position and role in the G7 and the G8. It has an increasing importance in the G20 group of countries. The G20 establishment of the G20 actually created new questions about the ability of the European Union for collective activity. However, we can say that the European Union has been actively using this mechanism to influence the order, global governance in international politics through EU institutions as well as through the activities of the member states. Can the EU be seen as an alternative player to the United States for diplomatic and security purposes in conflicts? There has been instances, but not very effectively. I mean, when we look at France in Mali and Central African Republic, and its assumption of the leading role together with the European Union in trying to address the conflicts in these countries, we can say that there has been a potential, but limited in this respect. Can we see the EU as a balancing force for the United States? The EU and the United States seem to be more complementary than competitive in this respect. For example, when we look at the previous example, France in Mali and Central African Republics, we can say that the question there was the lack of interest by the United States to intervene in those conflicts in this respect. And this allowed the European Union and its member states to actively become the leaders in the interventions. The EU, which is ignored and disaggregated by important actors of the United States, such as Secretary for Defense Donald Rumsfeld, and the debate on old New Europe, on the intervention in Iraq, actually still persists and create questions on the abilities of the European Union and the perception of the European Union as an effective global power, in all terms, of course. However, we can say that the European Union leaders have been specifically emphasizing the fact that the EU has a status of a key partner for the United States, and stress that they do have in this key partnership differences from the United States on key issues, actually. And we should also point to one of the problems here as the US concerns on the institutional setup and the roles of the established presidency and the high representative position by the European Union. However, we can say that in time the positions of the presidency and high representative have been more effectively taking part in global conflicts. So we have actually a mixed position for the EU as a power in global politics, and of course the relations with the United States bringing on several strengthening and problematic factors for the EU's possibility to obtain more power or exert its power in global politics. For this lecture, once again, I used the references by Christopher Hill and Michael Smith, International Relations and the European Union, Chapter 7 specifically, and by Federica Bindi, The Foreign Policy of the European Union, Assessing Europe's Role in the World, Chapter 14 specifically. Thank you very much for listening.